Here's 8 times that One Piece was saved by Oda's editors. Eiichiro Oda is of course the legendary author of One Piece, and he often gets praised like some sort of narrative god. And whilst he is the main driving force of ideas, over the last decade and a half, there have been 12 other people influencing One Piece from the shadows as series editors. And some of them have made shockingly huge contributions that I would go so far as to say have saved One Piece. Quite literally in one case. But to give you an idea of the sheer magnitude of impact an editor can have, let's look at Shanks. One of the most iconic events in One Piece is the very first chapter when Shanks sacrifices his arm to save Luffy, and this moment was not planned by Eiichiro Oda. The credit here goes to Kaoru Kushima, the Generation Zero editor, meaning that he was Oda's editor for Romance Dawn versions 1 and 2, as well as a whole ton of other one-shots that Oda created prior to starting the serialization of One Piece proper. So the prototype for One Piece Romance Dawn, it was looking okay. But overall, Kushima told Oda that his story, it wasn't interesting enough. It was lacking a certain degree of gripping action or drama or just, oomph. And it all just felt a bit flat at the end. Luffy was saved, but nothing was lost. There were no consequences. Everyone essentially just got to go on living as they do. No one learned anything. And Oda took this feedback very seriously, inevitably coming up with the solution of having Shanks lose an arm. Although in the version of Romance Dawn, it got bitten off by a shark rather than the eventual Lord of the Coast. And this was the perfect solution. So perfect that Shanks was completely removed from Romance Dawn version 2 in order to make this moment as surprising as possible for the eventual One Piece. Now I should say that this particular information has a tendency to be spread around without a source, and as a result it comes off a bit like an urban legend. But it was actually revealed in One Piece Grand Countdown 2, which was a special featurette included in Weekly Shonen Jump in 2010 to fill the void whilst One Piece was on a month-long break, transitioning from pre to post time skip. Although to the best of my knowledge, no full translation of this text exists. Just a few excerpts here and there. Kushima's influence goes far beyond Shanks though, and in a way you can credit him as being the godfather of every character in the series. It's only because of Kaoru Kushima that Eiichiro Oda writes characters the way he does. In Oda's own words, what I remember Kushima saying most was build your character, but I just couldn't understand it. My thought at the time was, I don't really need to. One-shots and serials are different things. A one-shot is kind of like a movie. You don't need every character to stand out. As long as the story is good, the one-shot will be good. But going with this logic, I kept submitting stories and they kept getting rejected. Kushima kept saying it's because you don't have characters. These aren't real characters. And we also have the following comment from Kushima himself. One of the reasons I made him, being Eiichiro Oda, draw so many one-shots is because I wanted him to draw all of these characters. Just keep drawing and drawing, coming up with more characters. I wanted him to stock his drawers, so to speak. I wanted him to have all of these ideas to call upon. So Oda credits Kushima as the reason behind the depth of writing behind his characters, and Kushima credits Kushima as the reason behind the breadth of all of the characters available. Because Oda's one-shots vary very significantly in tone. We have Romance Dawn, which would become the pirate world of One Piece, but we also have the half-samurai, half-western world of monsters, the world of spirits and demons of Ikkyako, Heaven and God's Gift for the Future, and so many others that were never published. The ideas behind all of which would eventually be incorporated into One Piece. So whilst Eiichiro Oda was already a vast well of ideas, it was Kaoru Kushima who really honed in and trained this skill. And he is directly responsible for the incredibly wide range of characters we see in One Piece. And perhaps most importantly, he's the reason why all of these characters feel so vibrant and alive, because he kept hammering in the mantra of build your character. But sometimes an editor's work is less about what gets included and more about what they strategically hold back. And for this we move to Takanori Asada, the first official Generation 1 editor of One Piece, who served from 1997 to 2001, being East Blue through Alabasta. So due to Kushima's influence, Eiichiro Oda now had a wide arsenal of characters to draw upon, and he was incredibly keen to do so, pretty much all at once. So much so that Oda wanted to introduce Fishman as early as Chapter 3 of the series, which is when Luffy and Kobe first arrive in Shell's Town and meet Zoro. However, Asada was strongly against this idea, and the Fishmen ended up being pushed into their own centric arc with Arlong. No official reasoning for this has ever been given, but if I had to guess, I would say it's to keep the story grounded and to sort of drip feed in the crazier elements of One Piece. I mean, this was so early that Luffy being a rubber man was already crazy enough, and what we needed to focus on here was Zoro. It's also never officially been stated who these Fishman characters may have been, but the live action gives us a great clue because they kind of mimicked this development path. Originally, One Piece live action planned to have Fishman present in episode 1. We even have some released makeup tests of Rika and her mother Ririka, and since the live action team did have very extensive discussions with Oda and included many other nods to his original ideas, I think that Rika would be a safe bet to assume as the intended Fishman character. But just like the manga, a decision was made to maybe not overload viewers with this sort of madness right from the the get-go. Skipping forward now to Kohei Onishi, the 5th generation editor, who served from November 2007 to June 2008, during which time he changed One Piece in ways that we are still feeling to this very day. I mean, this has now become a very well-known fact, however, the story behind it is much less well-known. I've said to death on this channel that the 9 supernovas on Sabaody Archipelago were completely improvised the week that the chapter was due. All of them were created in the space of 3 hours and hastily shoved into a story where they would go on to become some of the most compelling and well-integrated figures. And I usually talk about this in the relation of the genius of Eiichiro Oda. The idea that he can speedrun creating characters that would take most mangaka potentially days, weeks, I don't know, months to flesh out. To think that characters like Trafalgar Law and Jewelry Bonnie were both crapped out in 20 minutes each is absurd. However, the reason why Oda did this is because of Onishi. Onishi strongly advised Oda to make Sabaody more interesting, because at the rate it was going to be an underwhelming arc, even considering the planned shocking ending of the Straw Hats separating. Now, very interestingly, Onishi would leave his position as editor whilst the Sabaody arc was being published. And it's not a long arc, it's only 24 chapters. So this was probably one of his final pieces of input into One Piece before handing over the editorial reins. And even without knowing a single other thing he influenced, I can say with 99% certainty that this is by far the greatest impact he had on the series, because we're still feeling the ripple effects of it to this very day. Also, just as a bit of a side note, editor Onishi is also the one responsible for the infamous One Piece is 60 to 70% complete quote, which was made in 2014 when he said that One Piece would probably finish within 10 years, which puts us on track for ending the series now, right now in 2024. So he was probably wrong. But to be fair, so was everyone who has ever made a prediction about One Piece ending, including Oda himself. Following Onishi would be Akira Jean-Baptiste Hattori, the 6th generation editor, serving from June 2008 to December 2010. And Hattori has had an interesting collection of series impacts. We'll start with the big one, and then we're going to move to the weird one. The big impact is that originally, Ace wasn't supposed to be Roger's son, which probably explains why he physically resembles Luffy a lot, because the intention in the beginning was almost certainly that they were biological brothers. But as he often does, Oda began brain tinkering during the Paramount War saga. And one day, he casually asked Hattori what he'd think if Ace turned out to be Roger's son instead. Hattori was reportedly so floored by the idea, shocked, surprised, and excited, that Oda immediately knew that he had to go with this idea, because Hattori's reaction was a mere tiny reflection of what would be the readers at large. And one of Oda's main philosophies as a writer is to go above and beyond audience expectations. So from this reaction alone, Hattori had one of the largest impacts on the series. He didn't really even do anything, he just reacted. Although it should be noted that Hattori was against killing the idea of Ace during Marineford. From the day he found out, every meeting he had with Oda, Hattori would ask, "Are you really gonna kill Ace? I don't think that's a good idea." However, this was something that Oda had already decided from the very moment he introduced Ace. The reasoning being that Luffy needed to experience an intense hardship or loss. Although it's quite funny because Oda is also on the record as being very, very upset at the anime episode where Ace died because he wondered why he had to die in such a brutal way. Which, just in case anyone didn't pick up on it, that's Oda joking because he's the one who made the decision. I have to clarify that because this is the internet and sometimes people take things incomprehensibly seriously. To keep up the Marineford theme, this is a surprisingly known little fact, but originally Oda didn't plan on having Shanks appear to stop the war. He wasn't going to be present at all, and the exact details on this event are very difficult to find if they exist at all. What we have right now is essentially a list of things that Oda didn't plan on happening, so it's hard to tell how much of Shanks' intervention was editor-driven or not. But I do think it's funny to think of a world where we just go with all of the original ideas, which is that Ace is Dragon's son, he doesn't die, and Shanks doesn't show up to end the war. Those three things alone radically reshape One Piece as we know it from that point on. But Hattori's influence on One Piece was far from complete though. And for this, I think it's best that we defer to Oda's thoughts on this editor. I'm drawing this stuff because I want the readers to enjoy it. And the very first reader is my editor, of course. So the very first step is to make sure the editor enjoys the chapter. So sometimes the manga can evolve to reflect the editor's skin. So when I drew something with a little extra skin, Hattori really liked that. I was like, ooh, that worked. So maybe I got a little carried away with the fan service. That wasn't my intention. So I'll say that Hattori was the editor that likes women. So it was Hattori that, how shall we say, encouraged Oda to be a bit more bold with his female characters. Oh, and Oda also went on to say, it was perfect timing because then we had Amazon Lily, the island of women. It was so convenient to have Hattori there for that. Oda is also on the record as having moved Amazon Lily up in the production schedule because he wanted to get all of his pervy drawings out of the way before his daughter started school. Now, in later years, the effects of an editor have become quite questionable. The exact details of this role have changed over the course course of Oda's career? Because an editor is required to support the needs of the author, and those needs change. In the beginning with Kushima, that main focus was about developing Oda's writing, storytelling, and artistic ability. So editors had a significantly larger impact back then compared to modern day editors. An 8th generation editor, Suguru Sugita, has even stated that Oda asked me not to pitch him too many ideas. The reason behind it is that if it's another person's idea, then he won't be as inclined to draw it. Because it's his own story, he wants to draw his own ideas. And as recently as 2023, One Piece was publicly criticized by Kazuhiko Torishima, who you may or may not know as the controversial editor of Dragon Ball, and he said, "It's a pity that, unlike in the early days, One Piece editors can no longer disagree with Oda." And you know, after hearing Sugita's words, that may very well be the case. Having gone through all of these editor interviews, so many interviews, I can definitely say that they got a lot more dry in the most recent decade. There's not a lot of stories about collaborating with Oda, and they're more stories about just Oda doing things. In a way, it almost feels like the modern editors are there to historically record Oda. But to continue to be fair, Torishima isn't exactly an unbiased source here, and you'll see why in a bit. But especially considering the words of Takeru Isaka, the 7th generation editor who served from December 2010 to June 2014. Isaka said that meetings with Oda usually lasted between 4 and 5 hours. However, they can go on for much longer. And there was even one occasion where both of them spoke about the next chapter of One Piece for 15 hours. So maybe this is just a post-Isaka thing, but there is no way that you can have a conversation with someone for that long and not leave some kind of mark. Case in point, going back to Suguru Sugita, he served during Dressrosa and had a huge effect on Senor Pink. During a meeting with Sugita in 2015, Oda very casually revealed the backstory he'd conjured for Senor Pink. Oda does this with most characters, and again, this is the influence you can see at work from the very beginning with Kushima. Build your character. Even if he has no intention of including the character backstory, he still develops one. But during this meeting, Sugita was so incredibly moved by Senor Pink's past that a collective decision was made that it simply had to be included. And this was a very last-minute maneuver as well, because the chapter with Senor Pink's backstory came out in February 2015, meaning that this meeting was probably about the manuscript of that very chapter, which was then taken back and had to be pretty much completely redone. And Senor Pink, well, he tends to be a love or hate him kind of character, but honestly, apart from Doflamingo, he is easily my favorite Don Quixote family member, and that's because of his backstory, the inclusion of which was due to the editor's influence. It kind of makes me wonder how many other stories we've missed out on over the years, probably lots. And something else to note is that all of the editors who work on One Piece know what the One Piece is. When they start their tenure, they're called into a super secret special editor meeting, and Suguru Sugita has said that yes, it's true. He told me about 7 hours after I became his editor on the phone. He asked me whether there was anyone around. I told him no, and he said, "All right, I don't have anyone around me either, so let's talk." And then he told me. And for what it's worth, Sugita has also said in an interview that it's difficult to explain in the one word what the One Piece treasure is. So take that for what it's worth. A 9th generation editor, Takuma Naito, was even once asked by his ex-girlfriend what the One Piece was, and when he refused to say, she went on to block him on all social media. But let's go back to the beginning, because without one man, we wouldn't even have the privilege of talking about an ending. And this all comes back to Takanori Asada. From all of the available evidence, it's very arguable that One Piece may never have even been published without this man. Even with Oda's success with Romance Dawn, the various higher-ups at Weekly Shonen Jump had very little faith in One Piece as a series. And one of these higher-ups happened to be the aforementioned Kazuhiko Torishima, the legendary Dragon Ball editor who we've already heard from in this video, and he thought that One Piece was doomed to fail, and even made a bet with Oda that if One Piece ever became in any way popular, he would admit defeat. He obviously lost that bet, and to his credit, he did admit defeat. But I imagine that, especially with his public comments, he feels quite bitter about it. But enter Takanori Asada, a man who thought that he was going insane because no one else could see the potential of Oda's work. He himself said that he was so frustrated at his bosses during that time that most nights he would dream of barging into the Jump offices and beating all of them up. And it was through Asada's relentless endorsement of Oda and One Piece that eventually the series was given a chance, because Asada came into work day after day and made pushing One Piece his top priority. So without him, I don't know if One Piece ever would have gotten published. Which just goes to show that it doesn't really matter how talented you are or how good your ideas are, you're still very much at the mercy of circumstance. Much like how Luffy never would have gotten anywhere if it wasn't for the rest of the Straw Hats, Oda never would have gotten this far without Takanori Asada. And I say this without a single word of exaggeration. If there is anyone in this video who can truly claim the following title, then he is definitely the man who saved One Piece.